Content warning. Chapter 5 contains fictional stunts. Please be aware that these are fictional and would potentially be dangerous if you tried to replicate them in real life. Do not try and replicate them in real life. Also be aware that this chapter does contain a negative stereotype / generalization about people in Spain. Listen at your own risk. Hi, I'm Morgan, and today I'm excited to read to you from Grace Harlowe's junior year at high school, which was written by a woman named Josephine Chase, who wrote under the pseudonym Jessie Graham Flower. And this is the start of the Phi Sigma Tau section of the book. Chapter 5. The Phi Sigma Tau. At the door, a halt was called. "Prepare to jump," commanded Grace in a deep voice. 1, 2, 3, and jump down. Be careful. The 4 candidates gave 4 uncertain jumps and experienced the disagreeable sensation usually felt in attempting to jump downward when on level ground. This was one of the oldest and mildest forms of initiation, but Nora had insisted upon it and giggled violently as the 4 girls prepared for a long leap. Even Grace, who was conducting the ceremony with the utmost seriousness, laughed a little at the picture they made. "They'll do anything you tell them," whispered Nora, which was perfectly true. To show fear or reluctance in obeying the demands made upon one was to prove oneself unworthy of membership in the Phi Sigma Tau. "Let the music begin," said Grace. There was a faint snicker as Anne, Nora, and Jessica raised 3 combs wrapped in tissue paper to their lips and began the Merry Widow Waltz with weird effect. "You must waltz around the room 15 times without stopping," continued Grace, "and then sit down in the 4 opposite corners of the room, on the cushions provided for you." The girl chums retreated to the doorway of the room that had previously been cleared of almost all the furniture, to watch the movements of their victims as they endeavored to circle the room the required number of times. They lost their count, bumped each other at every turn, and at last staggered dizzily toward what they thought the corners of the room. Miriam Nesbit made straight for the door in which the chum stood, and Grace was obliged to take her by the shoulders and gently steer her in the opposite direction. Eleanor, after groping along one side of the room for a corner, was the first to find one, and sank with a sigh of relief upon the pile of cushions. The other girls had not been so successful. They all endeavored to sit in the same corner at once, and Grace was obliged to go to the rescue and lead 2 of them to opposite sides of the initiation chamber. "In order to become successful members of this society, it is necessary for you to sing. You may all sing the first verse and the chorus of any song you know. Only be sure that you don't choose the same song, and don't stop until you have finished," directed Grace. "Begin after I have counted 3. I will wait for a minute while you choose your song. The orchestra will accompany you." There was considerable subdued laughter from the orchestra, who had been instructed to play the Star-Spangled Banner, oblivious of whatever the candidates might sing. 1, 2, 3, counted Grace, and the concert began. Eva Allen chose John Brown's Body, Miriam Nesbit, Old Kentucky Home, Marion Barber, School Days, while Eleanor contributed the Marseillaise in French. The orchestra dutifully burst forth with the Star-Spangled Banner, and the effect was indescribable. The orchestra broke down before they reached their chorus, and the accompaniment ended in a shriek of suppressed mirth, but the candidates went stolidly on without a smile, and finished almost together. "Very well done," commended Grace. "I see you will be valuable additions to the society." The girls were then put through a series of ridiculous tests that the 4 chums had devised. They were made to dip their hands in water charged with electricity, caress a mechanical rubber snake that wriggled realistically, drink a cup of bone-set tea apiece, and were directed finally to bare their arms for the branding of the letters of the society. The branding was done with a piece of ice pressed hard against their bare arms, and the shock made the victims gasp for a second and wonder if they really were being burned. "You will now hold up your right hands and repeat after me," said Grace. "I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute my duties as a member of the Phi Sigma Tau, and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend its laws." This done, the girls received the grip of the society. The handkerchiefs were removed from their eyes, and they were pronounced full-fledged members. "That oath has a rather familiar sound," remarked Miriam Nesbit, trying to recollect where she had heard it before. I know, she said at last. It's the oath of office taken by the President of the United States in inauguration. Only you changed it to suit this sorority. You've guessed it exactly, replied Grace. I chose it because it sounded so much more expressive than to say, may my bones be crushed and my heart cut out if ever I am unfaithful to my vows. There was a general laugh at this, the girls agreeing that Grace's choice was infinitely less bloodthirsty. Now that you have so bravely endured the trials of initiation, you shall receive your reward, declared Jessica. Follow me. She led the way to the dining room, where a bountiful lunch awaited them, to which, after the manner of hungry schoolgirls, they did full justice. By the way, said Grace, after they had returned to the sitting room and were comfortably settled, you never said one word about my freshman prize girl. I thought you would be awfully interested in her. For the benefit of the new members, I will say that this society was organized with a definite object, that of helping others. We are to look after girls who have no one to make things pleasant or happy for them. Why, do you know that there are quite a number of girls attending high school who come from other places and who have to spend the holidays at their boarding houses without any fun at all? Look at this poor little Allison girl. She works for her board in the winter and in the mill in the summer, and now that miserable Miss Brandt is going to take her out of school, and she is getting along so well, too. Isn't it a pity, said Anne, that people like her can't understand that if a girl were allowed to finish her education, she could earn so much more in the long run than she could by working year after year in a mill? We might go to Miss Brandt and explain that to her, said Nora. Perhaps she would listen to us. I don't believe so, replied Grace. Besides, she might be very angry and take her spite out on poor Mabel, if we could only get Mabel away from her. But if she has legally adopted her, we couldn't do anything. Besides, where would she go if we did get her away? I'll tell you what I'll do, said Jessica thoughtfully. I'll ask Papa about it. Lawyers always know everything about such things. Maybe he could find out if Miss Brandt has any real claim upon her. That's a good idea, said Miriam Nesbit. If we can get her away from that hateful old wretch, the sorority could adopt her. She could stay with each one of us for a month. That would be 8 months, and at the end of that time, she would have finished her sophomore year. Then she could get something pleasant to do through the summer vacation. That would give her some money for clothes for next year. Perhaps by that time we could find some nice people for her to stay with, or if we liked her well enough, we could go on having her with us. I'll ask my mother tomorrow, and you girls might do the same. Miriam Nesbit, what a perfectly lovely plan! Exclaimed Grace Harlowe with rapture. I feel sure Mother would let me have her. She can come here any time, said Jessica. Papa allows me to do as I like. First catch your bird, said Nora wisely. Don't plan too much until you find out whether you can snatch her from the dragon's claws. I feel sure we shall win, replied Grace confidently. What do you girls think of it? She asked, turning to Eva, Marian, and Eleanor, who had so far expressed no opinion. Count us in, said Eva and Marian in a breath. And you, Eleanor? Asked Grace. She can live at our house forever if she doesn't disturb me, replied Eleanor lazily. My aunt won't care either. When we lived in Spain, she used to help every beggar we came across, and Spain is a land of beggars. She never can resist an appeal for charity. There was a sudden silence. Then Grace said gently, although she felt irritated at Eleanor's careless speech, I don't think Mabel Allison could really be called a beggar, and if we adopt her, we ought never to let her think that we consider her a dependent. Of course, we know very little about her yet, but I think she will prove worthy. I'm to see her tomorrow, and perhaps it would be better to talk a little more with her before we tell Jessica's father about it. Eleanor looked at Grace with an amused smile. How serious you girls are, she said. Is it school that makes you so? If it is, I don't think I shall stay long. I like to drift along and do only what my inclination prompts me to do. I hate responsibility of any sort. Perhaps you will feel differently about school after a while, said Anne quietly. This is my 3rd year at Oakdale High School, and I never had any good times until I came here. As for responsibility, it is a good thing to learn to be responsible for oneself, if for no one else. Well, perhaps you are right, but I am sure that if you had never lived long enough in one country to become acclimated, you wouldn't feel very responsible either, said Eleanor, in such rueful tones that the girls laughed, although they secretly disapproved of Eleanor's inconsequential attitude. Did you think the examinations hard? Asked Jessica of Eleanor. Oh, no, replied Eleanor lightly. I had an English governess who was with us for 5 years. She drilled me thoroughly in English and mathematics. I loathed them both, but studied them merely to show her that I could master them. Miss Thompson said my work was good, and that if I were ambitious, she would put me in the senior class. But I held out for the juniors, and finally got my own way. If you are going to take such a serious view of this gay world, however, perhaps I'll wish I had joined the seniors after all. No, I don't mean that. I'm awfully glad to know you, and feel honored at being a member of your sorority. Only, I don't expect to ever be a very useful one. My aunt has spoiled me, and I frankly admit it, so you see, there is no hope for me. She spread out both hands in a deprecating manner, and shrugged her shoulders exactly as a Frenchwoman might have done. I'm sure we like you, just as you are, said Eva Allen warmly. She had been rather impressed with Eleanor. Do you see the time? Said Nora, suddenly pointing to the old-fashioned clock in the corner. 10:30. I must go this minute. Sister will be worried. She immediately made for her hat and coat, the others following suit, with the exception of Eleanor, who was to wait until the coachman came for her. Once the girls were outside the gate, Marian Barber broke out with, What a queer girl that Eleanor Seville is. She is beautiful and fascinating, but I don't know whether I like her or not. You must like her, said Grace. You know the members of this society must stand by each other. But why did you ask her to join, Grace? Persisted Marian. She is different from the rest of us. I don't believe we shall get along with her very well. I'll tell you girls a secret, replied Grace. Anne and Nora already know it. Mrs. Gray wants us to be nice to Eleanor for a number of reasons, and of course, we wish to please her. Anne, Jessica, Nora, and I were talking about it the other day, and while we were laying plans for this sorority, we decided to ask Eleanor to join. We thought we could learn to know her better, and she would eventually become a good comrade. It sounds ridiculous to talk about helping a clever girl like Eleanor, but from her conversation tonight, you can see that she needs some wholesome advice occasionally, said Nora bluntly. Mrs. Gray seems to think we can be of some use in that direction, so we are trying to carry out her theory. I think I understand the situation, said Miriam Nesbit, and will do all I can to be nice to her, if she doesn't attempt to patronize me. I couldn't stand that. I know I used to do it. I suppose that's why it seems so unendurable to me now. David Nesbit didn't disturb us after all, remarked Eva Allen. It's a wonder those boys didn't put tic-tacs on the windows, or do something like that. The girls had come to the turn of the street, and were about to pass the only really lonely spot during their walk. It was an old colonial residence, the surrounding grounds extending for a block. It had been untenanted for some time, as the owners were in Europe, although both house and grounds were looked after by a caretaker. On the other side of the street was a field where the small fry of Oakdale usually held their ball games. I always hate passing this old house, said Marian Barber. It is so terribly still back there among those pines. She stopped short, an expression of terror overspreading her good-natured face, as she mutely pointed toward the old house. 3 ghostly figures, swathed in white, stole out from the shadows of the pines and glided down the wide, graveled drive toward the gate. Their appearance was terrifying. Their faces were white as their robes, and blue flames played about their eyes. They carried out in every particular the description of the regulation churchyard ghost. For an instant the 6 girls stood still, regarding those strange apparitions with fascinated terror. Then Eva Allen and Marian Barber shrieked in unison and fled down the street as fast as their legs would carry them. Grace, Nora, Anne, and Miriam stood their ground and awaited the oncoming specters, who halted when they saw that the girls did not intend to run. High school boys on a lark, whispered Grace to her friends. Let's charge them in a body. With a bound, she reached the drive, closely followed by the other girls. The ghostly 3, evidently considering discretion the better part of valor, left the drive and took to their heels across the lawn. But Grace, who was well in the lead, caught the last fleeing ghost by its robe and held on for dear life. There was a sound of rending cloth as the apparition bounded forward. Then it caught its spectre toe on a tuft of long grass and fell forward with a decidedly human thud. The girls surrounded it in an instant. Before it had time to rise, Grace snatched off a white mask smeared around the eye holes with phosphorus, which explained the flame-like effect and disclosed the sheepish face of James Gardner, one of the sophomore class. "Oh, let a fellow up, will you?" he said with a sickly grin. "You bad boy!" exclaimed Grace. "What do you mean by dressing up like this? Don't you know you might frighten some timid person terribly?" "Initiation!" said the youth with a grin, rising on his elbow and looking as though he would like to make a sudden break for liberty. "Part of the sacred obligations of the Knights and Squires frat. 3 fellows of us were initiated tonight. This was the last stunt." "Well, I suppose under those circumstances we shall have to forgive you. Did you appear to anyone else?" asked Grace. "Only to that old crank, Miss Brant. She was scared out of her wits," replied James, laughing. "2 of your crowd got out in a hurry too, didn't they?" "I suppose I shall have to confess that they did," replied Grace. "If I were you, James, I'd take off that costume and hurry away. Miss Brant is liable to inform the police, and they might not look at initiation stunts as we do." "That's right," said James, looking a trifle alarmed. "Wonder where the fellows went. I'd better put them on." "We never thought of that. If you girls will excuse me, I'll hunt them up." "Certainly," said the girls. "Good night, James." "Good night," replied the youth. "You girls are all right. Can't scare you." With a nod to them, he started across the grass on the run, his ghostly garments trailing behind him. "I'm glad that wasn't David," said Anne as James disappeared. "I was afraid when at first I saw them that they might be our boys. I didn't feel frightened at all after what Grace had said about meeting David." "Eva and Marian didn't show any great amount of courage," said Nora, laughing. "I wonder if they ran all the way home." There they are ahead of us," said Anne. True enough, the 2 girls stood on the corner waiting for the others to come up. "Why don't you hurry on home?" called Nora. "The goblins will get you if you don't watch out." "Don't tease," said Marian Barber, looking rather foolish. "We're awfully sorry we ran away, but when I saw those awful white figures coming towards us, I just had to run, and so did Eva. Why on earth were they?" "We're awfully sorry we ran away, but when I saw those awful white figures coming towards us, I just had to run, and so did Eva. Who on earth were they, and where did they go?" In a few words, Grace told her what had happened. "That horrid James Gardner. I'll never speak to him again," cried Eva Allen. "I hope he didn't recognize us. He'll tell everyone in school about it." "I don't think he did," replied Grace. "Oh, look, girls, here comes Officer Donovan. I was right when I said that Miss Brant would notify the police." "I hope she got a good scare," remarked Nora wickedly. "As for the ghosts, they are very likely at home by this time." And that is the end of Chapter 5. Thank you for listening to this chapter of Grace Harlowe's junior year at high school with me, and I hope you have a great day. Bye!